creative with the list of adjectives: love, lust, power, greed, wealth, insanity, burglary, kidnapping, rock and roll music, nuclear reactors, electric cattle prods, plastic automobiles, microwave ovens, soft drinks, small furry animals, strange aliens, and so on. But it turned out that one of the words we used, lust, was not acceptable to the very large distributor, Toys R Us, in the United States. So they wouldn't accept the box as long as it had it, so we had to redo the entire box and get rid of that word. Here's an example of the game. In the very beginning, you always have this one character, Dave, on the left, and you get to choose two of the 5 other characters. The opening sequence, and the idea was that you could win the game with any combination of characters you have, but that made the game very, very replayable. But at the same time, it made it really, really difficult to debug. Essentially, we had all these different combinations that you'd have to worry about. So it was something which I don't know that, well, I never did that again. When I did my next game, I gave you multiple characters, but we didn't give you a choice of who they were. Same thing for Thimbleweed Park, which we just did. You don't get a choice of who the characters are going to be. I'm sure I saw Dr. Fred get Sandy. It's up to us to get her out. This could be real dangerous if anyone wants to back out. Okay, I'm out of here. Bernard, don't be a tuna head. It's Sandy we're talking about. So this is all cutscene, and then at this point you get control. There's your verb interface on the bottom. You can say unlock the front door. So use front door. You pick up the map. You're basically building your sentences. Here's the spiral staircase. And here's another cutscene. This is Dr. Fred holding Sandy.
That's what she thinks.
So we had some, when we decided to do the Nintendo version, we ended up having some issues with censorship. They have very strong, I mean, it's okay to have shooting games where people get killed, but you couldn't have anything that's sexual in any way. So we had something on the wall that said, for a good time, call Edna, and gave the phone number. That wasn't okay, so that got changed to just call Edna. There was a room, Dead Cousin Ted, who's the mummy, had a pinup mummy on the wall. That was too sexual. And there was also a Play Mummy calendar on the wall. So that had to go, so we stripped those off the wall, Nintendo version. There was this statue. Is that Venus? I'm not sure if that's the real extent. Anyway, there was too much nudity here. So when we show them the scene with the nude statue, that they weren't happy with that. So this is how the game had to ship for them. There's a great article that Doug Crockford wrote that kind of went through the whole ordeal that he had to do to get this to ship. So, next game. After being locked up in a mansion for a year, for 6 months doing the coding, I really wanted to do a new game with Scum. I wanted to do a new age game that dealt with spirituality and psychic phenomena, but very funny still. So our general manager, Steve Arnold, said he knew just the guy, and he put me in touch with a friend of his named David Spangler, who lived in near Seattle. He was a founder of Findhorn. He wrote bunches of books, a spiritual teacher, author, great sense of humor. This is how he looks now. And we spent 2 days brainstorming at his house near Mount Rainier, and he kind of had all this knowledge of all these different things that would fit in the game. So we made the list, and I figured out how I could cram everything into the game. But rather than listing it here, let me read a letter from a fan. This is a real letter. Dear Sir, I'm returning this game,
Ah,
Zach
nice.
McCracken, because I find it quite unsuitable. The excellent game playability and graphics further compounds the real problem. The game is saturated with New Age Satanism teachings and concepts. The following are a few that I and others have come across. Eastern religions and meditation, African witchcraft and magic, a medium, a spiritual guru, a religious devotee, a person converts to an Eastern religion, a superior guardian race of ancient ones, one religion over all of time and all of the world, communication by aliens through dreams,
Fantastic.
out-of-body experiences, mind linking with animals, changing of consciousness, mind over matter, telepathy, mental telepathy, isn't the same thing? Mind over matter? Okay. Mind controlled by aliens. I think telepathy there should have been teleportation, because that's one of the things we had. Anyway, that's the list. I not only find these false teachings objectionable, but consider the immersing of them in humor and presenting them as a game very dangerous. Now, any of this was mentioned in the advertisements for the game. I implore you to at least make it clear to unaware buyers that this is a new age game that deals with religion. As a computer consultant and part-time youth pastor, I have an obligation to others in this regard. I will await your response before deciding how to further fulfill my responsibilities to warn others. Reverend Merwin Updike, Altoona, Pennsylvania. So our reaction to this was to thank him for his letter. We published it in our fan newsletter, which went out to all the Lucasfilm fans and people who bought our games. We weren't sure what else to do with it. So here's the cover for Zach. Cover was painted by Steve Purcell. Actually used a mirror, so that kind of looks how he looked at the time. The back of the box, anyone know who those two people are? Yeah?
Yes, I know.
That's Matthew Kane on the left and me on the right. I had the idea that if I stopped shaving for the 9 months it took to play the game, to work the game, I'd save about 16 hours of time, and that's about right. So the game shipped about 2 days earlier because I didn't shave. Packaged into the game, we had National Inquisitor. Zach was a tabloid reporter, essentially writing fake news. And we included an issue of the newspaper partly to discourage piracy, because we knew that this would be a valuable add-in, but also because there are lots of hints and helpful suggestions about things you might want to try in similar situations. We had a lot of fun. I actually didn't write this myself. Our marketing team wrote that. Here's some example of some of the game. So it opens up, this is the Commodore 64 version, which is how it released. Zach is complaining to his boss about working for the sleazy tabloid, really wants a Pulitzer, and he's never going to get it. Sick of making up stupid stories. And the boss says, make up stories that aren't stupid. And that night he goes home. Zach has this habit of coming up with headlines, kind of snide comments he makes. So he's being sent to Seattle to do a story on the 50th anniversary of the first UFO sighting. So even though we did the game 30 years ago, we set the game in 1997 to match the 50th anniversary.
To say that never was.
Tabloid reporter strangled his boss. What was that? Nothing
was.
boss. So he goes home.
Better
Zach, later that night, Zach's in bed alone again. And he has a strange dream. And this is the whole, essentially a cutscene, hopefully it's a cutscene of the opening sequence. And the dream is significant in that it basically shows him what he's going to be doing, next, what he has to do in order to complete this. sees the space on Mars. There's a map with spots on it with Earth, of a version of the Earth. And of course, all this symbolism is important.
Mm-hmm. Cazzo, mi sta finendo la batteria.
Nose glasses, and how many people have played this game? I'm curious. Raise your hand if you've played Zack McCracken. See a few people? Okay, good. Your pitch for tomorrow. Tomorrow is the celebration of Zack's 30th anniversary, so we're doing a much bigger presentation on this, including a movie that was made based on the game. So I hope you guys are here for that. So this is the Commodore 64. This is the EGA version, the 16-color version for PC. And then we also did a 256-color version for the FM counts that uses CD-ROM audio track. We also, you can see there's a poster there on the wall for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Have lots of different locations that we use throughout the thing. So rather than being locked up in mansion the whole thing, I sent you off to all these different places around the world. Kathmandu, Africa.
Lima.
Here's an example of mind linking. So Zack is mind linking with the bird. He's having the bird do something he couldn't do normally to solve a puzzle. Could switch characters like we could in the mansion, but it turns out there's two co-eds, two college students who also were getting dreams that told them how to build a space shuttle out of their VW bus. And so part of the game takes place on Mars as well.
But this side is like...
So I think that's good.
Wow.
That's me 30 years ago, and we're here, and I'm wearing my Zack McCracken sweatshirt. The next game we did, we finally got the chance to do a game on a special movie. So there's something missing here. There it is. And this is the third Indiana Jones movie. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The man with the hat is back, and this time he's bringing his dad. So the team, Steven Spielberg, Harrison Ford, and George Lucas, and
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. So Sean Connery as the dad. The other team, here's another example where we had a very, very limited schedule. We decided to do this, I think, in December. The movie was going to come out around June. So we really had 6 months to do a game that usually take us 9 to 12 months. So we put three designers, Ron Gilbert, Noah Foxley, and myself. And we all were programmers, designers, and co-project leaders to split up the game and try to get it to go faster. As a side thing, I just wanted to point out those two paintings on the wall. Let's zoom in on those. They both were Ralph McQuarrie original paintings that were concept sketches or paintings for the first Star Wars movie. And when I first started working at Lucas, someone brought me into this closet that was filled with all these paintings that he had done, and I got to choose like 3 of them. Here's 2 of them. And this has really inspired me throughout my time there, having these on the wall. So just saw those, I had to mention that. It's really nice. So Gamebox. At the very beginning of the project, we had a meeting with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas because we wanted to find out what could we do, what was against the rules. And the first question was, could we kill Indy?
Yes.
You know, it didn't quite make sense to, even though a rule was we don't want you to have the character die, it didn't really make sense to have Indy as a character who could never die. He's going to do really dangerous stuff. So we asked them that. We thought they might say no because it would be too sad or whatever. But Spielberg said, sure, of course, kill him. And then we said, could we deviate from the film? We weren't sure how strict we had to be to the actual script. And Steven Spielberg actually said, started saying, yeah, you can do anything you want. I came up with this whole separate scenario in South America, and like expanding the whole thing. And said, no, I think we want to stick with the movie, at least stay close because we already were really tight on time. So there's some advantages working with a movie. After this being the third movie, we knew Indy's character really well. We knew his wisecracks. We knew how he would respond in different situations. So writing dialogue would be a lot easier. All the sets and locations had been designed, and we had access to all the slides. Even though we couldn't see the film footage yet, we could see slides, set photography that would show how everything looked. We already had a built-in enthusiastic audience. We figured more people knew this than Labyrinth. But then there were issues. Similar to Labyrinth, because more people would have seen the film, that means more people would have certain expectations about what you could or couldn't do, and we had to keep the game really fresh. We also wanted to be true to the character of Indy, but also to the tone of the previous two Lucasfilm graphic adventure games that we did in-house, which meant it was going to have to be funny, at least at times a lot funnier than, say, Indiana Jones was. And of course, the really tight schedule. So we came up with a few ways to work on this. One would be to, three ways you could play the game, depending on what you really want to do. One would be to problem solve things, like use objects to solve puzzles. We had an action part of it where you could choose a box or fight the Nazi guards. And there's also dialogue. First game that we actually did a dialogue trees and let you choose what Indy might want to say as a puzzle solution. We also had a bunch of sequences that were in the movie that we really wanted to put in, but we just couldn't. There's just, again, no time. The first sequence was young Indy going through, trying to take back the cross Coronado, running across a circus train. The second sequence was, was it 15 years later, where he's on a boat, he actually gets the cross. This would have been really fun to do, but we just didn't think we had any way to do this. And then he gets a little bit wet. So we start this off in the game. This is the 256 color version of it with the circus train, and we did that with our credits. It's called Lucasfilm Circus. We have Indy running across the top, but it's all done as a cutscene in order to present the credits. Notice on that screen, we wanted equal billing. We couldn't figure out how to do it, so we tried to arrange it so that the first name was at the bottom, which kind of made it seem across the three names they were about the same, rather than 1, 2, 3 from the top down, had them shifted. And then here's the opening. Indy walks up. Notice he's still dripping wet from the last scene in the movie. Talks to his friend Marcus Brody. Marcus notices that he's dripping wet. Indy, why are you all wet?
Don't ask.
And he looks at the camera, does a take to us, and says, "Don't ask." Then here's an example of the text, the dialogue interface. You get to have a bunch of choices, and then you choose which one you want Indy to say to solve another puzzle, basically, get more information. Also had a try to match the movie in terms of Indy flying to Venice. I thought this is really appropriate. In the opening scene, there's Elsa coming in, and it doesn't actually look like this. I was there yesterday. I now know what it actually looks like, but we took some artistic license. We also used dialogue straight from the movie from time to time, and we thought was appropriate, and sometimes totally changed it. We didn't want Marcus to have to tag around, so we just put him on a gondola ride. There's the footage from the movie down below. Indy's inside. I like this bit. So, in the game, we had a very similar sequence, except we had to make it, not just X marks the spot. And he takes the thing out, the stanchion out of his pocket. Pause for a sec. Something we had to do in this game that we had not done before was, around the time we were doing it, we saw a new version of one of the Sierra games, which we considered to be our competitors. They probably didn't notice that we were around, but we definitely knew they were around because they've been doing graphic adventures, and at least in the United States, they tended to sell like 10 times as many copies as we did. Whereas in Europe, we were the ones that sold most of the copies of the games. And they had a lot more animation in their recent games than we had in ours. So we created this whole special case animation art tool to let the artists draw animation which would be overlaid on top of the backgrounds. And here's an example of one where we have the background already, and we have the special case animation of Indy knocking the hole in the ground and then jumping in. Here's another one I'll show you later. Here's another one where we had the background scene and we wanted to do something. There's a really nice payoff rather than just having the thing fall down like we would in our previous adventure games. And it helped that this is me yesterday. Unfortunately, it doesn't look anything like what it did in the movie inside. I mentioned this, that we had to adjust the names to resolve conflicts, so we all felt like we had equal weight. At the end of the game, let me pause for a sec. At the end of the game, we were doing the last sequence, and I guess through the communication error, both Ron Gilbert and Noah Faustine were writing a dialogue that would be for the end of the game. Ron gave me a bunch, which I thought was placeholder dialogue because it was really irreverent and really funny. And Noah gave me a set which was much more serious and closer to the film. And when I found out that both of them had intended their dialogue to go in the game, and they both didn't want to back down, I came up with the solution of using a random number generator to let the game decide which one to do at any time you play it, so it tends to be different. and then a few times you would take some from both. If else. Nice going, Elsa. I think that was Ron's. Yeah. And then one of the lines, this is, I think, Noah's, I see you have the heart of a true knight, but now you must go. I fear I have a Herculean task. Now where is that verb? And the alternate line was, I see you have the heart of a true knight. Of course, I'll be picking up this place for years. And you just try to, do both. But we also have the same issue with the end credits. Here's a little easier since it's just text, so I just created 3 versions of it, which would be randomized, and depending on which one you get, one of our names would be for the other.
Ah.
So I've been talking for about an hour. Just give the film credits that I have there, and let's take questions.
Well, thank you very much.
And also, if you want to reach me, you can either go through my website, electriceggplant.com, or I'm on Twitter a lot at David B. Fox. So, questions?
So, who's the first?
I have a question, but I want to expand it to Maro as well. About the actual scenery of the adventure game, and that's it. Do you see titles like Telltale Games or Life is Strange as a natural evolution of the graphical adventure or a side mutation?
So, do I see, let me see if I paraphrase that. Basically, are some of the current games, are they an imitation of the graphic adventures, or are they?
Not imitation.
Mutation.
A mutation.
Well, I feel like there was this evolution that you pretty much covered, which was to dumb down the interface, to make it simpler and easier for people to do it, with the assumption that modern players wouldn't be happy with actually having to figure out which words to use. So you basically turned into, we have this derogatory word a term we use called walking simulators, where you basically are walking through this somewhat interactive experience, but it's really, there's not a whole lot you can do or choose. It's very almost real-like in the way you're playing through. And when we did Thimbleweed Park, we really wanted to go back to the old style where you had lots of choices and actually use the verbs to open up a whole bunch of funny opportunities of things that you couldn't do if you just had to use. That totally goes away. It just gets very antiseptic in the sense, or very, very closed. So we wanted to make sure that you had as much freedom as you did before, and that's why we stayed with that. I guess you could find some way between the two and go back to like a coin interface where you have more verbs, but because the Kickstarter was intentionally set to pull in those people who love the old games, we had to go back to that interface. Interestingly, this is something you kind of talked about. It was really, even for the fans, the 18,000 people who backed the game on Kickstarter, there were some that were really, really adamant that it be exactly like the old games. So they were upset when we changed the fonts of the interface. So we gave you an option in the beginning of the game where you could choose the old style font or the new one. We also had an innovation where you had the sentence line was attached to the cursor. We gave you an option to go back to having a separate sentence line, and that was really for the diehards who really wanted to be a certain way. We also did something where since we were actually playing on a much higher resolution computer than than the resolution shown here. We often would have multiple resolutions on the same screen, which was also a huge no-no for a lot of people. They want a 1 pixel size, only 1 pixel size. And I think we tried an option which disabled that. It looked really bad. It was really, and we figured, okay, we'll just let them be angry at us.
Mhm.
So we kept doing it.
Maybe because when you do a Kickstarter, you bring that along with the funding method, because people already paid, and so they feel to be
Right.
entitled to ask and to pretend to you to do what they want.
And in fact, in the drawings we used on the Kickstarter for that game were much more Maniac Mansion style, Commodore 64 style graphics. And then because the Kickstarter was so successful, we actually had enough money to hire Mark Ferrari, who's this brilliant background pixel artist. And we immediately upgraded the look of the game significantly from, say, 1987 style to like 1992 style. And there were a bunch of people who were really upset that we had made it look prettier. So, and most people were really happy that it looked that great, but some weren't. So it's interesting.
You should have done maybe 10 different games and a very, very long menu with all the options to choose what was the real version.
I wanted to comment on something that you were talking about too, about the in-jokes problem. When we did the game, we were all focused on the backers. They essentially were our bosses. They hired us to do this game. And so we knew that they were huge fans of our old games, so we took every opportunity we could to put in as many in-jokes and references and lots of self-referential humor, meta jokes into the game, and probably went overboard. And the initial, the response of the backers was great, they loved it. But the initial reviewers, lots of them were complaining about all the meta jokes and all the in-jokes. I mean, the line you showed of Dolores with the Sierra game, that's the, I believe that's the in-jokes off version. The in-jokes on version is a much more of a diatribe that she goes into about hating that. That was my line, by the way. I wrote that dialogue because it was my own pet peeve. And we just tried to cut it back. So after maybe a month or two, the game came out. We released a new version with the in-jokes off option by default, and you had to actually ask for the jokes in order to get them.
Yeah.
And those who didn't know about it probably never look at option menus anyway. What was the other joke we had during Kickstarter? Mark did this bathroom in the Quickie Pal, and he inadvertently had the toilet paper going back, in my estimation, backwards, so that the paper went behind closest to the wall instead of over the front of the thing. And we had this huge outcry from everyone on the internet saying, "How could you do that? The toilet paper is wrong." So I think there was actually a tongue-in-cheek article from one of the major gaming websites that kind of blew it out of proportion to make it into a funny thing. And Ron said, with fake anger, "Okay, you asked for it, we're going to put in an option." So we redid the art and gave you the toilet paper under option and created the
Yeah, I think it's very fun because it's very funny to know all the process because with Kickstarter and all the dev diary you can read, you can know these kind of things, and it's something that broaden the game and the fun of it.
Yeah, I think Ron did a brilliant job of I mean, I've never seen a Kickstarter managed this well before. Usually someone goes off, they get the money, they go off and they do the game, and you don't hear from them until it releases, and sometimes it never releases, so you really don't have any way of knowing what's happening. But Ron was writing blog posts like 2 or 3 times a week. I think I wrote one, Gary would write a few. We kind of give the task to everyone, and then we also started doing these weekly podcasts, stand-up meetings, where we actually had our meetings with Ron, Gary, and I on the air. and talked about issues we were going through, and often Ron would say, okay, Mike, stop recording, and he didn't stop recording, and we'd have these little things that we would say thinking the mic was turned off, that he would, of course, he would publish also.
Yes.
But that was a lot of fun to do that, and it was also, some people have said that entire collection of blog posts and podcasts are like a master's class in graphic adventure game design, because you really see the issues we come up with, and we present a lot of them. We try to do it in a way where we weren't going to spoil the game for players, but we wanted to make sure that they had a way to interact with us and see what the process was without, and actually participate in it without trying to spoil any of the gameplay. I mean, we probably would have said a lot more if that wasn't an issue, but we try to keep that secret. So I don't know if I answered your question and kind of went off on a tangent. Yes.
I actually have two questions, but one of them is actually involves a spoiler for Thimbleweed Park, so I'll save it probably for later when nobody else is.
That's no problem.
Since I think I speak for myself as a developer, but I think there are some of us here probably are developers as well. Are there any? Okay. I have a question regarding how actually do you handle your day job? Meaning that we are used to work on something we actually find. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with the previous question I was trying to do. Okay, so basically you showed us how you handled Rescue and Fractalus, and you said basically we showed this version that had no shooting and no violence in that. Then we had to change it. But you also had tight time schedule to do stuff. And this was kind of shows how easy it was for you to just come up with stuff and put them into the game. Something that later on in the Scum engine was even more easy, because you could talk about stuff the morning, and after lunch you would have that implemented in the game, which is something we are really used to now. So if I have an idea, I can change my code at my leisure and just do anything like that. But how do I handle let's say, this power of changing stuff all the time? How do I set myself to deliver something in a quick and easy way without scope creep? Let's say that.
Yeah. So see if I can paraphrase that.
Sorry about that.
So that's good. Basically, on Rescue and Fractalus, George comes in and has us change major part of the game. It was a major part of a major change, and the advantage to that was that we didn't have a schedule at that point. Because they were intended as, for the first two games, really R&D type games, we didn't have a deadline. There was no marketing department. No one was saying you have to get this game gamed in by a certain time. They gave us pretty much as much time as we needed to do it, and we took it. We took the time we needed, and took the feedback and figured out what part of his feedback we could use and implemented that. We did not have him come back a second time to test it, though, just in case. You asked about, with modern tools, where it's much easier to make major changes and try things. How do you balance that, having all these great new ideas with the fact that you might have feature creep and a game which never ships because you keep on adding more and more stuff to it. And it does take discipline. It helps if you have a specific budget you're working towards. In the case of Thimbleweed Park, we did have a budget, and which was really the Kickstarter funds. Ron ended up going out and getting another $300,000 to $400,000 to help for cover
Mm.
additional ports and marketing and other things that really weren't covered enough in the Kickstarter. So it was about $1 million budget for that game, but it was a set amount of money. And more than anything else, the money kind of determines how many more features you can add. Ron really was the taskmaster in terms of.
I remember at some stage he lost some money for quite a while. Then it was just a bug in the document.
Yeah, and we had to, try to focus on the release because we didn't have unlimited funds, and every day that it went longer meant he's paying us to do more work.
Yeah.
But there were also were times when we saw, especially after the release, because when we saw, besides bug fixes, the things. I mean, talk about testing. Even though we had really great play testers, bug testers. There's a difference when you have 5 or 10 people testing the game, and you immediately have 10,000 people testing the game, and all sorts of edge cases, things that were essentially random things that could happen at the same time start happening, and exposing a bunch of bugs that we never even knew about. And we fixed them all within the first week or two and did a re-release. Based on feedback, Ron went back and we did a major update to the game a few months later, which included the hint system. There were just a lot of people who were complaining that we saw that when we did the casual ship with the casual version, I think. But there, especially for casual players, they were going online and finding walkthroughs that were designed for the regular mode, the hard mode, and getting confused and sending questions to our support line because the walkthrough they were going through didn't match the game they were playing. They were playing the casual instead of the hard version. And at the same time, one of our fans, women in Australia, had created an online hint system for the game. And we basically took that as the basis and then expanded it. And because we were doing it in the code, we knew where you were in the game and what you had done, so we could make the hints more customized to where you were to give you a little push. And then the other big area that people were complaining about was that the main characters that you were controlling, the 5 main characters, couldn't talk to each other. And
I complained about that.
yeah, you did.
I did.
Yeah. And so Ransom and Reyes, they walk into the same room, and you couldn't just have them talk to each other, or even more, Ray and Reyes, the two agents. So that was much more of a change because it meant going back to the sound studio to record new dialogue. And I think Ron had considered doing this initially, but he couldn't come up with a way to do it that wasn't really like trying to solve it, create a hint support system between having them talk to each other. Like, what do we do next? What should we do this? And since we already had the hint system, we kind of pulled back and said, okay, let's just talk about keeping them focused on where they are in the game and throw in some backstory and keep it lighter. And also when 2 characters walk in the room, they haven't seen each other for a while, they'll say hi to each other. And that just felt dead when they walk in the room and they just ignore each other. It didn't make them, so that was some code that I added to that to make that happen. And we went back to the studio and recorded a bunch of new lines, and I think it just warmed up the game. It made it feel more real and just really worked. And it wasn't something we hadn't thought of. It was something that we thought of and just kind of pushed off to the side. And based on feedback we were getting, it was clear that it was really important, especially for the more casual players, to have both of those things. So it's really a trade-off. Like if it's going to make a huge difference to the game, really, then you should do it. If you don't have a budget problem, then you do it for years if you want to. But you do want it to ship at some point. And there's also just getting really sick and tired of working on the game is another issue. Like I really want to stop this and do something else. Probably Ron more than any of us was was feeling that towards the end because he was doing way more of the work than we were. So, does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. Giving long answers, but.
Other questions?
In a game like a Maniac Mansion, or in which you had more storylines with more combination of characters and stuff like that, how did you keep track?
So in a game like Maniac Mansion, where there were a lot of characters, a lot of different storylines, how do we keep track? I mean, during development.
Yeah, like when you thought he can do this, he can do this.
Yeah.
How they solve the things are different depending also on the characters.
But we had these huge charts that I think we drew by hand at that point.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and they were kind of a combination of, it wasn't as much a flow chart of the game progress. It was more dependency charts, like what you needed to do to get to one point to do the other point. So we had a map. When Ron came to me after he had gotten the SCUM system working more or less, and said, "Hey, would you like to come on for a month or two and script this game?" And I said, "Sure." So I came on board after the game had been designed, at least mostly designed. But by design it means he knew where the plot points were, who the characters were, and what the major puzzles were, but not any of the details. There was no design doc that laid out every single interaction or puzzle, definitely no dialogue. So Ron would generally go in there and write a scene or two, a cutscene, and kind of establish the tone. And pretty much the same thing happened in Thimbleweed Park. He'd establish the tone and the characters' personalities, what the kind of things they would say, what kind of humor it was,